All right, this is Chapter 7, Section 1, Causes of the French Revolution. Right. Economic and social inequalities in the old regime helped cause the French Revolution. I'm going to move the mic. All right. Oh, look, it fell apart. All right, causes of the revolution. Well, as we said before, the old regime, sometimes called the ancien regime. It is a social and political system in France. It dates back to the foundations of France, where you have the peasants at the bottom and you have the nobles and the king at the top, and then you mix in the Catholic clergy. The clergy and the nobles and the king kind of don't have to do anything. And the third group, the peasants and everybody else, even if you have money, if you weren't born into the nobility, your money doesn't mean anything. So all of those people are down at the bottom. And what they call it is they divide their social classes up into estates. So there's the 3 estates. So again, the 3 estates are like that. You see the Leroy, the king and the royal family at the very top. And then you have the clergy and you have the nobles. And underneath that dotted pink line, you have everybody else. You have artisans, laborers, peasants, everybody. This is the people, and they are 98% of the population. The first 2 estates, the Catholic clergy, the privileged estates. The first estate is the clergy, is the church. And the Catholic Church actually owns 10% of the land in France, and they pay very few taxes on that land. And in fact, they get something called tithes from the people. So the people give them, pay them taxes to keep the church going. So they take in money from the third estate. They pay out almost no money to the French government. The second estate is the rich nobles. They own 2%. They own 20% of the land, but they are only 2% of the population. So they own most of the land, but are the least amount of people. They also pay very few taxes and take in huge amounts of money from the work done by the third estate. The third estate is 97% of the people. 97%, some 97, 98. The middle class is called, I know it looks like bourgeoisie. I know it does. But it's actually the bourgeoisie. The bourgeoisie have very few privileges. And the peasants, the same. The third estate is all these people. The bourgeoisie, if you were bourgeoisie, you might have money, but you still have no rights because you were in the third estate. You have the same rights as a peasant, usually. You have very few privileges. You pay heavy taxes. You give 10% of your income to the church. And you're pretty generally poor. What sparks a change in France? What makes them say, you know what, we're fed up and we're not going to take it anymore? First thing, Enlightenment ideas. The Enlightenment ideals that were percolating there in France and those salons inspire some people in the third estate. Just because you're in the third estate doesn't mean you're not educated. So you have some of these, especially the bourgeoisie, reading about equality and justice and natural rights and Rousseau and Locke and all this other stuff, and they think, wait a minute, natural rights? Okay, and the second example is the American Revolution. It's right across the pond there. And here is a perfect example of a group of people who rose up and used Enlightenment ideals to justify getting rid of a ruler that they saw as a tyrant. It took a long time, but eventually they were successful. Now, part of the reason they were successful is that we got so much help from the French. We like to belittle it that they didn't do much, but really, they gave us a ton of money, a ton of gunpowder, and used their navy to help beat up the British Navy before they even got over to fight us. At one point, the French government spent enough money that they could have fed and clothed all of their people for nearly a year which probably would have put off the revolution. But they gave that money and spent that money on us. Why did they do this? Do they love America? No. It's just that they hate Britain that much. They're willing to throw tons of money for revenge for their loss in the 7 Years' War, to now rub it in Britain's face of, oh yeah, you won the 7 Years' War. Nice job with that. You did that to defend your colonies. Yeah, you don't have those colonies anymore. So after that, you get just this perfect storm in France. You have economic troubles. The taxes are rising. The cost of living is rising. The cost of living increases from 62% from 1788 to 1789. And at that point, wages only rose 22%. So suddenly, you couldn't afford most of the things you used to be able to afford. And then in the 1780s, we get a crop failure, which causes a shortage of wheat. The shortage of wheat leads to the price of bread doubling in 1789, and that leads to mass starvation. Now, why would bread going up in price lead to mass starvation? Well, being French, at this point in time, the average French peasant eats 2 pounds of bread each day. It is what keeps you alive. You soak it in broths and soups. You take it with you. This is what keeps you alive every single day. Number one, if our bread tasted this good, I'd probably eat 2 pounds of it as well. Number two, I guess nobody there was gluten intolerant. So while all of this is happening, what's going on at the very top? Well, you have King Louis XVI and, of course, his wife, Marie Antoinette. Her mom is Maria Theresa. She was that Habsburg Empress in Austria. And Maria Theresa had like 16 kids. And so she uses her daughters especially to secure alliances. So after the 7 Years' War, or before the 7 Years' War, I'm not sure. I gotta look that up. When France and Austria decide to create an alliance. Now, normally they hate each other, but they decide to create an alliance, and they sign this alliance, and then to secure this alliance, they set up a wedding between the grandson of the king and the youngest daughter of Maria Theresa, and her name is Marie Antonia. So it's, Maria Antonia. So, of course, they change it, they Frenchify it, and it becomes Marie Antoinette. When the king dies and Louis and Marie become the royal couple, Louis is like 21 or 20 something, and Marie Antoinette is like 19. And they come into this country that is horribly in debt. Louis XIV had spent obscene amounts of money building Versailles. The 7 Years' War put a real dent in the budget, and then, of course, all that money that they spent on the American Revolution. Louis is kind of an idiot, and he doesn't know what he's doing. He certainly doesn't understand economic policy or anything like that. However, what he does believe is he is God's choice for king, so he somewhat believes that if he's God's choice for king, then he can't really, whatever decision he makes is got to be the right one, because otherwise God wouldn't have chosen him to be king. Unfortunately, he keeps making the wrong choices, and he doubles the debt of the country. The banks in France refuse to lend Louis any more money to keep the government going. And so they are headed for a shutdown. Kind of sounds familiar, doesn't it? Louis, oh, no, go back. Can I do that? Okay, well, Louis' poor decisions and weak leadership leads to a national crisis. And so he waits till the very last minute, and he calls something called the Estates General. And it's a meeting of representatives from all the 3 estates, and they meet here in this big, huge thing. And you can see there he is underneath the what the heck is that thing? The curtain with a box over his head. There he is. And they meet there to theoretically give advice to the king and vote on his ideas and policies. So they're all there in Versailles. And the problem with this is, the third estate has very little power in this system. Now, it's interesting that, he calls the estates general anyway, but each estate, even though there's, 50, 60 representatives, maybe more, each estate only gets one vote, regardless of population. So 97 to 98% of the population, well, they only get one vote, but so does the clergy, and so does the nobility. And of course, the nobility and the clergy, they have a vested interest in trying to keep things the same. They don't want things to change. Life is good for them. They don't want that to end. So they almost always vote together. And the third estate, even though they are most of the population, gets left out in the cold, and eventually completely. So when he calls the estates general, the third estate's delegates are the bourgeoisie and usually somewhat wealthier, and these are people who had been to school and had grown up in this era of Enlightenment, and so they go to Versailles thinking this is their chance to make a real change for the people of France. And once they're there, there is Sieyès, I think. Sieyès. He is a priest, and he sees that things are going to proceed the same way they always have, with the third estate getting crushed under the feet of the clergy and the nobility. And he actually sides with the third estate, and he goes in there and he persuades them that they are the people of France and they need to make some major changes in French government. And they are super fired up about this. They take his idea to heart, and they meet on their own, and they declare themselves the National Assembly, like their own parliament representing the people of France. They do this on June 17th, 1789, and they say that since they represent the people of France, that they are the only ones with the right to pass laws for the people of France. It's very social contract. So, of course, when the king, the nobles, and the rest of the clergy find out about this, they're less impressed and less than enthused. And so on the 20th, when the delegates of the third estate show up, for the estate's general meeting, somebody didn't give them a memo that the meeting had started earlier, and the door is locked. They're locked out. So they're pissed off. What are you going to do? They walk down the hall, and they find the king's tennis court, and it's actually an indoor room. It's not tennis like you and I think of tennis. It's probably something more like handball, but it's an indoor court. They bust down the door, and they all meet in there, and they decide to take an oath. And this is the representative picture. It's called the tennis court oath, and there you can see that clergyman down in the front. I think that's him in white. And you have all these members of the assembly, of the third estate delegates, taking an oath that they would not leave and they would not stop meeting until they had written a constitution for France. So they are literally at this point saying, we're going to become a republic. And everyone took an oath that they would not leave until that point. It's, called the tennis court oath. And then they called themselves the National Assembly. This is very overly dramatic. I doubt it looked this awesome. They're all doing this amazing salute and reaching out to each other in wonder. And of course, you see the curtains have flown in at just the right point, and the light is shining down on this one guy reading it. Yeah, I doubt it was like that. It was probably just a bunch of pissed off people. Coming up next,